Prairie points are folded fabric triangles that are often used as a decorative edge finish on a quilt. I'm Kathy Wiley, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make prairie points that are intended to be appliqued onto a quilt. We will learn how to make prairie point triangles, prairie point corners, and prairie point squares. The prairie point triangles, corners, and squares are folded over a template of freezer paper or fusible interfacing. To make a prairie point triangle that finishes 2.5 inches wide by 1.25 inches high, cut a rectangle of fabric 3 inches wide by 1.75 inches high. Also cut a freezer paper or fusible interfacing template 1.75 inches square, and then cut in half diagonally. Center the triangle template on the back side of the fabric rectangle and fuse in place. Now we want to fold the fabric over the template to make a triangle. I'm going to apply liquid starch to the fabric. Then fold the first corner over the template and press. I'll do the same thing for the second corner. And press. Now open up the folded edges to remove the freezer paper. If you used fusible interfacing for the template, it does not need to be removed. And there you have a prairie point triangle. To make a prairie point corner that finishes 2.5 inches wide by 2.5 inches high, cut a square of fabric 3 inches wide by 3 inches high. Also cut a freezer paper or fusible interfacing template 1.75 inches square. Center the 1.75 inch square template on point on the back side of the 3-inch square of fabric and fuse in place. We're going to fold the corners in the same way as the prairie point triangle, except this time we're going to fold 3 corners into the middle. Starch and press the first corner. The second corner. And the third corner. This fourth corner will get sewn onto the quilt block, as you'll see in a bit. Now remove the freezer paper template. To make a prairie point square that finishes 2.5 inches wide by 2.5 inches high, cut a square of fabric 3 inches wide by 3 inches high. Also cut a freezer paper or fusible interfacing template 1.75 inches square. Center the 1.75 inch square template on point on the back side of the 3-inch square of fabric and fuse in place. We're going to fold the corners in the same way as the prairie point corner, except this time we're going to fold all 4 corners into the middle. Starch and press the first corner, the second corner, the third corner, and the fourth corner. Now remove the freezer paper template. And there you have a Prairie Point square, ready to be appliqued onto a quilt. Why would I go to all this trouble to make Prairie Points instead of just piecing with half-square triangles? Because I want to sew them onto a plaid fabric. If I piece the triangles to plaid squares, the plaid will either end up on the diagonal, or else I'd have to cut the plaid squares on the bias. And in either case, there's not a chance that I could line up all the squares to keep the plaid pattern running continuously around the edges of the block. Or you could use this technique with any patterned fabric that you want to keep uninterrupted. These pre-folded Prairie Points can be appliqued onto a large square of plaid fabric, keeping all the stripes running continuously in both directions. Here's how. I have here a 10.5-inch square of fabric that matches my Prairie Points. With the raw edges even and the folded edges up, I'll arrange 3 Prairie Point triangles along each side of the background fabric. I'll center the first triangle and then place a triangle on either side with a 1/4-inch overlap. And pin in place. Now I'll add the Prairie Point corners. The points of the corners should line up with the points of the triangles, and the unfolded corner should line up with the raw edges of the background. Pin in place. If it helps you to actually see the seam line, you can draw a diagonal line on the Prairie Point corners. We'll stitch the Prairie Point triangles to the background square with a 1/4-inch seam allowance. And then pivot 45 degrees at the Prairie Point corners and sew across them diagonally. From the front, press the Prairie Point corners in to meet the other 3 points. From the back, press the Prairie Point seams towards the block. Now we have a sawtooth background ready to be appliqued. Here I have a 15.5-inch square of plaid fabric. I'll center the background square and Prairie Points on the plaid and pin in place. I'm using a blind hem stitch to machine applique the points onto the plaid. There you have it. Perfect points and perfect plaid. Say that 3 times fast. So what are the Prairie Point squares for? Well, let's say we wanted to make more of these blocks, maybe with a different plaid. The Prairie Point squares can be appliqued between the 2 blocks to make side-by-side plaid diamonds. which is how my Tartan Toques pattern is done, using the Tartan Traditions collection from Northcott.